Yeah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Can everybody hear me on this one? Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, so they can't hear me.
Okay. Yes, Mufti Sahib, it's green. We're okay. Okay, so I'm starting the presentation.
Speak to them, see if they could hear you.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. My apologies. Now we're getting ready to start the presentation. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. My apologies. The history of the Hanafi contribution to the science of Hadith. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Umar Hanifah, and I am here today to present to you a brief presentation or course outlining the history and principles of Hanafi Usul Hadith, or the Hanafi science of Hadith. From the outset, I must begin by saying that many of the concepts that we will learn and cover today are vastly unknown to the public, even to Hanafis, as the Shafi'i science of Hadith, spoken of at great length by the great celebrity scholars of the Shafi'i madhab, who have gained unprecedented popularity and fame throughout the Muslim lands over time. The Shafi'i science of Hadith has dominated the minds and hearts of Muslims, and has dominated a world where technicality has been traded for generality, detestability has been traded for accessibility, and striving has been traded for doing things easily. By consensus of Hanafi muhaqqiqun, or official representatives of the Hanafi madhab, these principles of Usul Hadith are the madhab's official principles, detailing the Hanafi method of authenticating and utilizing ahadith, and they are authoritative, having been taken from the reported statements of Hanafi Muhaqqiq and Imam Nu'man ibn Thabit ibn Zuta ibn Marzuban Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ibrahim al-Ansari, Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, Imam Zufr ibn al-Hudayl, Imam Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Abi Sahel Abu Bakr al-Sarakhsi, Abu Bakr Ahmed ibn Ali Arazi al-Jassas, Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi, Imam Qadi Khan, Abu Musa Isa ibn Abban, Abu al-Yusr al-Bayzdawi, Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, and many others who were muhaqqiqun, or official representatives of a madhab, who related official principles and opinions dealing with the usul and furu of the madhab. In regards to my tahqiq, or research done in preparation for accurately relaying these opinions and understanding their realities, the findings in this presentation have been taught to me verbally by many scholars who found and studied these principles and dedicated themselves to these principles from their original Arabic sources. And further research was done by myself using both Arabic and English texts written on the subject, whose content I confirm indeed traces back to Arabic books of the aforementioned Imams. I can now confirm without question that what was relayed to me verbally is accurate and authentic. And I confirm that what I have read and seen is also accurate and authentic. The following are indeed the opinions of the Hanafi Imams on the Hanafi science of Hadith. Introduction to this course. The following presentation is a brief overview of the history and key principles of Hanafi Usul Hadith, or the Hanafi science of Hadith, according to Hanafi Muhaqqiqun who spoke on this subject. The principles of Hanafi Usul Hadith began being enumerated by the founder of the Hanafi madhab, Nu'man ibn Thabit ibn Zuta ibn Marzuban al-Kufi, also known as Abu Hanifa, and ended with the opinions of Hanafi muhaqqiqun on this subject around the 13th century. Introduction to Imam Abu Hanifa. Nu'man ibn Thabit ibn Zuta ibn Marzuban al-Kufi, also known as Imam Abu Hanifa, was a 7th century Sunni theologian and jurist, reportedly of Persian ethnicity, who was the founder of the Hanafi school of Islamic theology and jurisprudence, the Hanafi and Maturidiyya schools, respectively. For more information on the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, one can consult the many specialized works written on the Imam, such as the works of the popular Manaqib Abi Hanifa genre, which was sealed by the famous Manaqib Abi Hanifa of Hanbali Imam Ibn al-Dhahabi, which was his historical record of the life of the Imam. Introduction to the legal methodology of the Hanafi madhab. In the Hanafi madhab, sources of Islamic law are followed by this order of priority: the Quran, the Sunnah, Ijma' of the Sahaba, the opinions and actions of the Sahaba, and Qiyas. And these are the primary sources of Islamic law of the Hanafi madhab. The secondary sources of Hanafi Islamic law are Aql, Istihsan, and Urf, or local norms and customs. This list is not all-inclusive, or a list that includes all of the usul of the usuliyun and fuqaha, or those who have created usul, but is all-inclusive of Hanafi specific sources of Islamic law. Brief overview of the history of Hadith transmission. Contrary to popular belief, Hadith, or reported statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, began being recorded in written form and transmitted or narrated in the lifetime of the Prophet. Then mass transmitted by 6 from the male Sahaba, 6 from the male Tabi'un, and 6 from the male Tabi'un. The 6 Sahaba are Abu Hurairah, Abdullah ibn Umar, Anas ibn Malik, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Jabir ibn Abdullah, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. May Allah be pleased with them. Then hadith were mass transmitted by 6 from the Tabi'un. These are Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Ubaidullah ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, Amr ibn Dinar, Qatada ibn Di'ama al-Sadusi, Yahya ibn Kathir al-Laythi, Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i, and Sufyan al-A'mash. 2 from the Hijaz region, 2 from the Basra region, and 2 from the Kufan region, respectively. Then hadith were mass transmitted by 6 from the Tabi'un, or those who we call the A'imma al-Hadith, the Imams of Hadith. Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Abu Dawood, Imam al-Nasa'i, Imam al-Tirmidhi, and Imam Ibn Majah. whose mass documentation and mass hadith narrations reached the rest of this ummah. And may Allah bless them all ajma'in. The Hanafi Kufan methodology. Starting with Imam Abu Hanifa, the Hanafis and Kufans, all being colleagues of one another, had several overarching beliefs regarding hadith and its role as an Islamic source of law. An overarching belief is a belief that humans prioritize and put above everything, or put above everything. And early Hanafis had many overarching beliefs. Learning these overarching or fundamental beliefs are key to understanding the legal system of the Hanafis, and also to understanding other Islamic legal systems, such as the legal system of Malik ibn Anas, or Imam Malik of Medina, Muhammad Idris al-Shafi'i of Egypt, and Ahmed Hanbal, the great Imam, and his students. The city of Kufa, located in Iraq today, was the birthplace and place of inspiration for Imam Abu Hanifa and the early Hanafis, and was well known at the time for being a cradle of knowledge. So much so that the city of Kufa in the time of Imam Abu Hanifa was called Qubbatul Islam, Ra'is al-Islam, and Ra'is al-Arab in the time of Imam Abu Hanifa. And those who lived in Kufa at this time were called Jumjumat al-Arab, Rumhullah, and Ahullah, the organization of the Arabs, the spears of Allah, and the people of Allah, respectively, as narrated by Imam Ibn Sa'd in his Tabaqat Ibn Sa'd. Another merit for the city of Kufa was that the city of Kufa had nearly 2,000 of the Sahaba living in the city of Kufa shortly before the emergence of Imam Abu Hanifa, with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ali ibn Abi Talib being the most famous. As Mujtahid Imam Ibn Sa'd also narrates in his Tabaqat Ibn Sa'd, these Sahaba, or companions of the Prophet, were there sent specifically on the orders of Umar ibn al-Khattab when he was the Khalifa or Caliph of the Muslim community. And the city of Kufa even became a cradle for Hadith transmission and Hadith knowledge, with famous Tabi'un scholar Muhammad ibn Sirin reporting that there were over 5,000 scholars of Hadith in Kufa, with 500 of them also being jurists. Taking knowledge primarily from the students of critical thinking scholars such as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ali, Imam Abu Hanifa and the Kufans, or Islamic scholars of Kufa, had many overarching beliefs pertaining to the Quran and Hadith narrations and their role as Islamic sources of law. These beliefs were the belief that the Quran is mu'jiz, or inimitatable, in the sense that it does not have a likeness to any other texts, including Hadith narrations. The belief that the Quran has been transmitted to us mutawatir lafzi, or through chains of transmission that transmitted the Quran verbatim. The belief that in religio-legal matters, the Quran takes priority over all other Islamic sources of law, including the umum or general statements of the Quran, the belief that it is better for Muslims to learn, memorize, and utilize a small number of ahadith that are unquestionably authentic versus a large number that may not be. The belief that in some cases, the legal opinions and practices of the Sahaba are a mutlaq or binding source of law. The belief that the opinions and practices of the fuqaha or jurists are more preferred as evidence over the opinions and the practices of the non-jurists. The belief that ijma' of the Sahaba was the only valid form of ijma', along with the belief of Hanbali Imam Ahmed Hanbal, rahimahullah, the belief that ahadith should not contradict the Quran or mutawatir hadith narrations, the belief that qiyas or analogical reasoning is a binding source of law, the belief that pure or unaided reason or logic is a source of knowledge but not a source of law, the belief that there is yaqeen or certainty in knowledge, the belief that aql and naql are equal because one does not function without the other, the belief that isnad or a sanad is not always required to verify the authenticity of a hadith or to use a hadith, the belief that the concept of sunnah and hadith are two distinct things, the belief that the sunnah practices that were emphasized by the Prophet are the true definition of sunnah, and lastly, the belief that istihsan is a binding source of law. The usul hadith of the Hanafis. Although over time, countless Hanafi scholars have contributed to Hanafi usul hadith, Hanafi usul hadith was primarily codified or officialized by 9 Hanafi scholars, with each scholar speaking extensively on the field of usul, including the field of usul hadith. These Hanafi scholars were Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, Imam Isa ibn Abban, Imam al-Tahawi, Imam al-Jassas, Imam Abu Zayd al-Dabbuzi, Imam al-Sarakhsi, and Imam al-Bayzdawi. Not to be confused with Shafi'i Imam Abu al-Khair Abdullah ibn Umar al-Baydawi, the author of the famous tafsir Anwar al-Tanzil wa Asrar al-Ta'wil, also known as Tafsir al-Baydawi. The usul hadith of Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa's principles of hadith science unique to Imam Abu Hanifa were the principle that ahadith must not contradict the Quran, the principle that ahadith cannot be used for legal punishments, the principle that mutawatir and mashhur ahadith are accepted as authentic without verification, the principle that using hadith science-based terminology was permitted, the principle that ahadith must be preserved with memory rather than with writing, the principle that istihsan and qiyas is a binding source of law, the principle that legal opinions from ahadith of the Sahaba were also a binding source of law and were above istihsan and qiyas, the principle that hadith narrations can only be accepted from narrators who were pious, the principle that hadith narrations must not be accepted by Muslims of a particular sect or particular sects of Islam, and the principle that ahadith from jurists are over ahadith of non-jurists. This list of principles of hadith science unique to the Imam is not all-inclusive, but seeks to serve as a basic framework for the Hanafi usul hadith of another Imam, Imam Abu Yusuf. The usul hadith of Imam Abu Yusuf. Imam Abu Yusuf's principles of hadith science unique to Imam Abu Yusuf were the principle that ahadith that are not well known to the jurists are not accepted, the principle that ahadith that contradict the Quran are not accepted, the principle that ahadith are accepted for the establishment of judicial punishments under Islamic penal or criminal law, the belief that the Sunnah can abrogate the Quran, the principle that the legal opinions of the Sahaba are a binding source of law, the principle and belief that the legal opinions of the Sahaba are to be preferred over qiyas as long as the Sahabi didn't contradict or act contrary to his or her own hadith narration, and the principle that the legal opinions of a Sahabi are a legal evidence as long as they have not been challenged by the Sahaba. This list of principles of hadith science unique to the Imam is not all-inclusive, but seeks to serve as a basic framework for the Hanafi usul hadith of another Imam, Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani. The usul hadith of Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani. Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani's principles of hadith science unique to Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani were the principle that athar or hadith narrations from the Sahaba were to be preferred over qiyas, the principle that ahadith that contradict the Quran are not accepted, the principle that ahadith that spoke about important issues that concern the entire ummah, also known as the concept of umum al-balwa and Hanafi usul hadith, the principle that the legal opinions of the majority of jurists are to be preferred over the opinions of individual jurists, and the principle that when two ahadith conflict, the narration of the person who is the most trustworthy is to be preferred. This list of principles of hadith science unique to the Imam is not all inclusive, but seeks to serve as a basic framework for the Hanafi usul hadith of another Imam, Imam Isa ibn Abban. The usul hadith of Imam Isa ibn Abban. Imam Isa ibn Abban's principles of hadith science unique to Imam Isa ibn Abban were the principle that ahadith that contradict the Quran are not accepted, the principle that ahadith were either mutawatir, fabricated, or those awaiting verification, the principle that mashhur or famous ahadith must be verified, the principle that ahadith can be used for religious issues but not for legal ones, the principle that ahadith can only be accepted if their narrators act upon their own narrations, the principle that ahadith cannot be accepted if their content is mujmal or unclear, the principle that ahadith cannot be accepted if they contradict established sunnah, the principle that hadith narrations should be ranked based on whether or not they are hadith narrators should be ranked based on whether or not they are well known and whether or not they are someone who is known for their memory as opposed to their knowledge and vice versa. The principle that the legal opinions of the jurists from the Sahaba are more preferred over the opinions of the non-jurists of the Sahaba. The principle that it is unlikely that the Sahaba would oppose or refuse to act upon a hadith that is truly authentic. And the principle that mursal, or broken ahadith are more reliable than muttasil or unbroken ahadith. This list of principles of hadith science unique to the Imam is not all-inclusive, but seeks to serve as a basic framework for the Hanafi usul hadith of another Imam, Imam at-Tahawi. The usul hadith of Imam at-Tahawi. Imam at-Tahawi's principles of hadith science unique to Imam at-Tahawi were the principle that ahadith that contradict the Quran are not to be accepted, the principle that ahadith that contradict authentic sunnah or sunnah practices are not accepted, the principle that ahadith that contradict established religious or universal principles are not accepted, the principle that ahadith that are not acted upon by their narrator are not to be accepted, the principle that the concept of sunnah and hadith are two distinct or different things, the principle that there are some ahadith that make things recommended and not always wajib or mandatory, the principle that using specific words related to hadith science is permitted, and the principle that mursal ahadith are permitted. This list of principles of hadith science unique to the Imam, is not all inclusive, but seeks to serve as a basic framework for the Hanafi usul hadith of the later Hanafi Imams who contributed to Hanafi usul hadith. Hanafi usul hadith according to the Hanafi mutaakhirun. After the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, Imam Isa ibn Abban, and Imam al-Tahawi, 4 Hanafi Imams wrote major treatises in the field of usul, which also included Hanafi usul hadith. These scholars were Imam al-Jassas, Imam al-Dabbuzi, Imam al-Bayzdawi, and Imam al-Sarakhsi. Imam al-Jassas, al-Dabbusi, al-Bayzdawi, and al-Sarakhsi have not been given dedicated sections in this presentation covering their specific usul hadith, because in most cases they simply related the usul hadith of the Hanafi mutaqaddimun or early Hanafi scholars. However, an interesting thing to note here is that their works of usul are perhaps the most important works in Islamic history in the field of usul, and deserve a dedicated presentation just on these works, especially the work of Al-Fusul fi Al-Usul by Imam Al-Jassas and Kitab Al-Usul of Imam Al-Sarakhsi, rahimullah. The Mu'tamad or agreed upon Hanafi Usul Hadith. From the aforementioned lists of Hanafi Usul Hadith from Hanafi Imams, although some of them differ, several principles are agreed upon by them all, which through the concept of consensus constitutes the codified or official Hanafi Usul Hadith. Now, in the spirit of impartiality and objectivity, it would be unfair to represent the individual opinions of each and every Hanafi scholar as being the mu'tamad or agreed upon Hanafi Usul Hadith. Although many ulama have argued that the opinions of the founder of a madhab alone constitutes the official opinions of a madhab. However, there are 2 types or 2 forms of consensus: a unilateral or individual form of consensus centered around the opinions of a single person, and a communal form of consensus centered around the opinions of multiple people, which I believe is the most irreproachable or faultless form of consensus, especially since in this presentation that we are covering, I am speaking of the usul hadith of an entire madhab, rather than solely the usul hadith of its founder, Imam Abu Hanifa. Since this is the case, I declare that the most commonly agreed upon usul hadith of the Hanafis are the official Hanafi usul hadith. Although according to the ulama, Imam Abu Hanifa's usul hadith alone technically suffices as the mu'tamad or official Hanafi usul hadith. Hanafi usul hadith on the rules of hadith reception and transmission. In regards to the rules related to the reception and transmission of ahadith, there are several principles that the Hanafis abide. For the Hanafis, the one who narrates or receives a hadith must fulfill certain conditions before their ahadith can be accepted, or go through a process of verification in order to be accepted. As for the rules related to tahammul and ada, or reception of hadith and narration of hadith respectively, it is unclear whether or not these rules were created primarily by the scholars of hadith or the scholars of fiqh. However, what is certain is that Hanafi ideas and opinions certainly contributed to usul hadith regarding the concept of tahammul and ada, especially considering the fact that Imam Abu Hanifa and the Hanafis were born and lived before the majority of eminent scholars of hadith emerged. After years of study and extensive research into the methodology of the Hanafis, I personally believe that the majority of these rules and principles were actually discovered by Hanafis, as well as the rest of the rules and principles found in usul hadith that are found in Shafi'i usul hadith, Maliki usul hadith, and Hanbali usul hadith. Even before Imam Shafi'i and the Shafi'is contributed so much to the science of usul hadith. And my evidence for this statement is the evidence or statement of Shafi'i Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi and his al-Kifaya fi ma'rifat usul ilm al-riwayah, that Imam Abu Hanifa was the first person to use the term haddathani and stipulate or require that all hadith narrators must have adalla. And on this issue, I welcome varying opinions and disagreements. Hanafi principles on the rules of hadith reception. In regards to the reception of a hadith, there are several principles that the Hanafis abide. For the Hanafis, their principles in regards to the rules and regulations for both reception and narration of hadith were both vast and sophisticated for the time. According to Hanafi usul hadith, related to tahammul or reception of a hadith, every hadith narrator must be an intelligent child or an adult at the time that they receive a hadith narration, in order for their narrations to be preliminarily accepted. According to Hanafi usul hadith, age does not make a difference, but what does make a difference is the person's intellectual capacity. That is why unknown to many hadith narrations from children are actually accepted in Hanafi usul hadith, with conditions. However, according to Hanafi usul hadith, for tahammul or hadith reception, people who are mentally challenged are not permitted to either narrate or receive a hadith, and their hadith rejections are rejected. Hanafi principles on the rules of Hadith transmission. In regards to the rules related to the transmission of a Hadith, there are numerous principles and rules in Hanafi Usul Hadith, owing to the fact that narrating a Hadith from one perspective is a much more consequential or serious endeavor than merely listening to a Hadith, since Hadith constitutes a source of law that Muslims must abide and are bound by. The first principle of Hanafi Usul Hadith related to Ada or Hadith transmission or narration is, like the condition for Tahammul, a person must be intelligent. The second principle is that anyone who narrates a Hadith must be a Muslim, something that according to Hanafi Usul Hadith can be established by simply knowing that one's parents are Muslims. The third principle is that anyone who narrates a Hadith must have a strong memory that allows them to accurately receive and narrate a Hadith. The fourth principle is that anyone who narrates a Hadith must not be majhul or unknown if he is not a Sahabi. And the last principle is that anyone who narrates a Hadith must be pious or have adala. The Hanafi opinion on the shart or condition of adala in Hadith transmission. According to Hanafi Usul Hadith, there are 4 ways that adala or righteousness or piousness of a person can be established. These 4 ways are through the ruling of a judge in a court proceeding, through being recognized or having tazkiyah by the ulama, through outward conditions, as according to the Hanafis, inward conditions cannot be relied upon or reliably measured or known, or through by being a scholar. The concept of bid'ah in Hanafi Usul Hadith related to tahammul and ada. There are 2 major opinions amongst Hanafis as to whether or not a hadith can be accepted by a person who does bid'ah, such as the innovations of the Khawarij, with early Hanafi influenced scholars going with the opinion or view that a hadith narrated by one who does bid'ah are rejected altogether, such as Imam al-Sarakhsi, and later Hanafi influenced scholars going with the opinion that people who do bid'ah are accepted as hadith narrators if they fulfill extra conditions, such as Imam al-Bukhari. These extra conditions are strong memory or dabt, carefulness or wara', piety or taqwa, and that they are not a liar or not known to be a liar in narrating a hadith, and that they do not promote their beliefs as being the best Islamic practices or beliefs, as mentioned by Imam al-Bayzdawi and his Kanas al-Wusul. Of these 2 major Hanafi opinions regarding the issue of accepting a hadith from a mubtadi' or one who does bid'ah, surprisingly, the position of Imam al-Bukhari who was influenced by Hanafis, became the relied upon position, Hanafi position, in this issue and case. Although Imam al-Bukhari was a mujtahid and not a Hanafi or Hanafi muhaqqiq. The Hanafi position on bid'ah and ada and the famous position of Imam al-Bukhari. In reference to this issue, the majority of early Hanafis held the position that one who does bid'ah cannot be accepted as a narrator of hadith. However, later Hanafis, such as Imam al-Baydawi, developed a middle road between totally accepting a hadith from people who did bid'ah and totally rejecting them. And today, the Muslim world remembers squarely the opinion of a Muslim who was not a Hanafi, but was Hanafi influenced, Imam al-Bukhari. It is well known among students of Usul Hadith that Imam al-Bukhari held the position that a hadith narrated by people who did bid'ah are accepted. And it is also well known that he accepted a hadith even in his famous books and treatises, a hadith from people who did bid'ah. Many believe that this is a unique position or opinion of Imam al-Bukhari. But this opinion is also the opinion of the Hanafis. In order to support this claim, one needs to remember that Imam al-Baydawi, a Hanafi and a Hanafi muhaqqiq, ruled that a hadith narrated from people who did bid'ah are to be accepted. Categories of hadith transmission and reception of Hanafi usul hadith. According to Hanafi usul hadith, there are two types of hadith transmission and reception: azima methods and rukhsa methods, strong and weak methods, respectively. In Hanafi usul hadith, there are azima and rukhsa categories related to the methods of narrating a hadith, and there are azima and rukhsa categories related to the methods of receiving a hadith. The purpose of this difference or distinction is because the Hanafis established that some hadith transmission and reception methods are strong and some are weak. In other words, some naturally provide a higher level of reliability and some naturally provide a lower level of reliability. The azima methods of Hanafi reception, hadith reception, according to Hanafi usul hadith, are قراءة على شيخ or عرض, قراءة شيخ, and مكاتبة. قراءة على شيخ is when ahadith are being read to a sheikh by a student. قراءة شيخ is when ahadith are being read by a sheikh to a student. And mukataba is when a sheikh writes a letter or a hadith in his own handwriting and sends it to the student and gives him ijaza or written permission to narrate it. The rukhsa methods of hadith reception, according to Hanafi usul hadith, are ijaza and manawwala. In regards to the transmission of ahadith, there are also the two categories: azima, transmission methods, and rukhsa, transmission methods. The azima transmission method, according to Hanafi usul hadith, is hadith narration that is lafzi or verbatim, according to Imam Abu Hanifa himself, and the rukhsa transmission method, according to Hanafi usul hadith, is when a hadith narration is ma'na or narrated by meaning. Jar wal ta'dil, according to Hanafi usul hadith, the field of jar wal ta'dil in the science of hadith refers to the science of criticizing hadith narrators in order to ascertain whether or not their narrations are authentic. Not only have several Hanafi scholars have made relevant opinions to this science, but Imam Abu Hanifa himself was the first Hanafi to criticize narrators of ahadith. And at the end of this presentation, inshallah, some examples will be shown detailing Imam Abu Hanifa's experience in the field of jarh wal ta'dil. The status of Imam Abu Hanifa in ulum al-hadith, according to the ulama. To date, there are well over 1,000 documented opinions by scholars speaking of Imam Abu Hanifa's status in the field of hadith, with the majority of them being from scholars of hadith. Of these comments were made by Muslim scholars Malik ibn Anas, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, Sufyan al-Thawri, al-Awza'i, Ibn Jurayj, Ahmed Hanbal, Mis'ar ibn Qidam, Isa ibn Yunus, Ma'mar ibn Rashid, Abu Ja'far al-Razi, Fudail ibn Iyad, al-A'mash, Bishr ibn al-Harith, Amr ibn Dinar, Dawood al-Ta'i, Fadl ibn Dukain, Abdullah ibn Dawood, Nasr ibn Ali, Shaddad ibn Hakim, Makki ibn Ibrahim, Yahya ibn Sa'id, Nadr ibn Shumail, Abu Yahya al-Hammani, Fadl ibn Musa al-Sinani, Abdul Rahman al-Muqri, Waqi' ibn Jarrah, Yahya ibn Ma'in, Shu'bah ibn al-Hajjaj, Ayub Ayusakha Tiyani, Abdullah ibn al-Aun, Atta ibn Abi Rabah, Qadi Shuraykh, Ibn al-Dhahabi, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and many others. The status of Imam Abu Hanifa and ulama hadith, according to the ulama, must not be overlooked or overstated. For a convenient list of scholars that commented on the status of Imam Abu Hanifa in ulama hadith, please see the work of al-Salihi, who has recorded 22 pages of comments from scholars on the status of Imam Abu Hanifa in the field of hadith. The final verdict on Imam Abu Hanifa's strength in Ulum al-Hadith. According to Shafi'i Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the status of Imam Abu Hanifa in the field of Hadith cannot be and should not be discussed lightly and without careful consideration, and shouldn't really be discussed. And about this, Shafi'i Imam al-Sahawi said that Ibn Hajar said, when asked about whether or not what Imam an-Nasa'i said in his book Kitab Du'afa wa al-Mutarakin about Imam Abu Hanifa being weak in hadith, about whether the statement of the Imam that Imam Abu Hanifa was weak in hadith was true, Ibn Hajar said, Imam an-Nasa'i is one of the Imams of hadith, and whatever he said was based on what appeared to him as well as that which his skills in performing ijtihad led him to. But not every statement of a person is true. A group from the Muhaddithun agreed with the statements of Imam Nasa'i, and Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi gathered all acceptable and unacceptable statements about Imam Abu Hanifa and put it under his section. And in his Tarikh al-Baghdadi, and in it, he excused the Imam because he said that the Imam only narrated a hadith that he memorized completely from the moment he received the hadith to the moment of its narration. And because of this condition of the Imam, very few ahadith were narrated by him. However, I say that it is best not to argue over this issue because the Imam and those like him have crossed the bridge, and therefore none of them are affected by what is being said about them. But they are indeed on the level that Allah raised for them, and the proof is the fact that everyone after them followed them. So rely on this, and Allah is the master of all assistance. Imam Abu Hanifa's view on hadith rejection. Imam Abu Hanifa, a master scholar known for his fairness and love for the Sunnah, did not hold the belief that hadith should be rejected in favor of logic, or even that hadith should be rejected for a light reason, contrary to popular belief. About this, Imam Abu Hanifa says in his book, Alim wal Muta'alim, one of 5 books penned by the Imam that have survived today, rejecting any person who narrates a hadith that contradicts the Quran is not a rejection of the Prophet. It is a rejection of that person. This rejection is to that person, not the Prophet of Allah. Everything the Prophet related, whether we heard it or not, we listen to it and obey it, and believe in it, and testify to all of it. And we also testify that he was in accordance with what Allah demanded in every issue, and in no way did an innovation happen in his speech, because he only spoke what Allah approved of him to speak. From this statement of Imam Abu Hanifa, one can argue that Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion is in line with the Shafi'i Hanbali opinion that ahadith have been protected and preserved perfectly by Allah, since according to the Imam's statement, the Prophet's speech is nothing other than what Allah made the Prophet say. And this is the reality. Hanafi Usul Hadith and the Khabl al-Wahid. Khabl al-Wahid, according to Hanafi Usul Hadith, is a term used to describe a hadith that are not mutawatir or mashhur, as mutawatir and even mashhur hadith and Hanafi Usul Hadith are accepted, at least according to Imam Abu Hanifa. And later Hanafis except Imam Isa ibn Abban, who believed that mashhur ahadith still must be verified for authenticity. According to Hanafi Usul Hadith, Khabl al-Wahid ahadith that are not mutawatir or mashhur are dealt with in a variety of ways, depending on the situation. The issue of Khabl al-Wahid is the central issue that separates Hanafi usul al-hadith from Shafi'i usul al-hadith. And it is in this issue that much hatred and disdain for Hanafis by those who believed that ahad ahadith provided certainty was formed. Khabil al-Wahid and Hanafi usul al-hadith continued. According to Hanafi usul al-hadith, ahadith are either accepted or rejected, maqbool or muqata, respectively. Of the ahadith that are rejected or not accepted as being authentic ahadith, there are two types of rejected ahadith. Ahadith that are rejected on the grounds of being externally inauthentic, and ahadith that are rejected on the grounds of being internally inauthentic. According to Hanafi usul hadith, ahadith that are rejected because they are either mursal in some places in the sanad, their matan opposes established principles of Islam such as the Quran, Sunnah established by mutawatir sources, aql, ijma', maslaha, the actions of senior Sahaba, the five senses, or hawas al-salima, or because there is a flaw in the narrator, such as he is unknown, is fasiq, or openly rebellious, or he's mentally challenged. Khabil al-Wahid and Hanafi usul hadith continued. According to Hanafi usul hadith, Khabil al-Wahid ahadith should not be used for nafil, mubah, and mustahab actions, and also for establishing aqaid or Islamic beliefs, a principle also shared with hadith scholar Imam al-Bukhari. As Hanafi Imam Zafar al-Uthmani, the author of the famous Ila al-Sunan, says in his Qawaid fi Ulum al-Hadith, no Muslim has ever been able to claim that they have accepted every hadith as being authentic, nor acted upon every hadith. Throughout history, Muslims have rejected hadith, and the principles which led them to make their decisions must be investigated and considered. Khabil al-Wahid and Qiyas and Hanafi usul hadith. Another concept discussed in usul fiqh and Hanafi usul hadith, along with the concept of the Khabil al-Wahid, is the concept of Qiyas, or analogical reasoning. Analogical reasoning is reasoning based on the construction of an analogy. Unlike pure reason, which is reasoning associated with natural thoughts and natural thinking. In Hanafi usul hadith and Islamic fiqh, there is a preference for qiyas as a source of law, but just how high that preference is depends on the strength of what other principle conflicts with qiyas, according to Hanafi usul hadith. According to Hanafi usul hadith, the concept of qiyas in relation to its apparent conflict with a khabil al-wahid or ahadith or ahad narration is handled in a multitude of different ways. From the outset, we must begin by first stating that it is the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa himself that ahadith and athar, or narrations from the Sahaba, are to be preferred over qiyas, as long as they pass certain conditions, such as not contradicting the Quran. And this opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa was related by Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Hamza Muhammad ibn Maymun al-Sakkari, Imam Abu Isma Nuha al-Jami', Abdul Karim ibn Hilal, and Imam Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i. In addition to the opinion of Hanafi Muhaqqiq Abu al-Hussein al-Quduri, the famous author of Mukhtasar al-Quduri. Qabl al-Wahid and Qiyas continued. There are several instant evidences found in historical sources that demonstrate that Imam Abu Hanifa and the early Hanafis clearly preferred ahadith over qiyas, even ahadith over qiyas, almost to the point of implying that early Hanafis didn't believe in practicing qiyas. The first evidence that I would like to present is an example of Imam Abu Hanifa, where Imam Abu Hanifa preferred ahadith over qiyas. In the issue of a fasting person who forgetfully eats or drinks because he forgets that he is fasting, the narration of Abu Hurairah, narrated in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, that says that the Prophet commanded us to not make up that fast, Imam Abu Hanifa preferred this narration because he originally was going to rule that Muslims must make up the fast. And this ruling changed, and this change of ruling was narrated by Imam Muhammad in his Kitab al-Hujjah ala Ahl Medina. The second evidence that I would like to provide is an example of Imam Abu Hanifa negatively commenting on qiyas. It has been narrated by Shafi'i Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi and his al-Faqih al-Mutafaqih that Yazid ibn Abdul Rabih heard Waqi' ibn al-Jurah say to Yahya ibn Salih al-Wahazi, O Abu Zakaria, beware of qiyas. For I heard Abu Hanifa say that some forms of qiyas is worse than urinating in the masjid. A statement also reported by Hanafi Imam Muwaffaq ibn Ahmed al-Makki in his Manaqib Imam Abi Hanifa. And al-Faqih al-Mutafaqih Shafi'i Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi explains himself the meaning of Imam Abu Hanifa's statement and says what Imam Abu Hanifa meant by this statement is that some forms of qiyas have a serious defect, and Allah knows best. The third evidence that I would like to provide is the criticism that Imam Abu Hanifa and others leveled against those who claimed that he did not make rulings based on narrations, but based on rationalism and his own personal opinion. About this, Imam Abu Hanifa was reported to have said, on the authority of Hanafi Imam Muwaffaq ibn Ahmed al-Makki and his Manaqib Abi Hanifa, how is it that people say that I make rulings based on my own opinions when I make rulings based only on narrations? And about this, Hanafi Imam Zufr ibn al-Hudayl is reported to have said about Imam Abu Hanifa, also on the authority of Hanafi Imam Muwaffaq Ahmed ibn al-Makki and his Manaqib Abi Hanifa, do not believe what critics of Abu Hanifa say about him. Abu Hanifa and his students issued legal judgments based on the Quran, the Sunnah, the opinions of the Sahaba, and then qiyas after this. And lastly, the fourth evidence that I would like to provide is cases where his students, primarily Imam Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, also preferred ahadith over qiyas. This is evident in many examples, but the example that I would like to use today is the example of Abu Yusuf and his Kitab al-Hudaj preferring a hadith to qiyas when he came across a hadith of Umar and Abdullah ibn Abbas that stated that taxes should be put on rocks and sea materials taken out of the ocean. In this case, Imam Abu Yusuf had a choice of doing qiyas and ruling that sea materials should be treated like fish since they are both from the sea, but he didn't. He preferred two ahadith over qiyas. Here in this example is Abu Yusuf not only preferring ahadith over qiyas, but disagreeing with his teacher to achieve these aims. Qabl al-Wahid and Qiyas continued. There are various opinions from numerous scholars, even of other madhahib or Islamic schools of thought, about the rulings of Imam Abu Hanifa when it comes to the issue of preferring ahadith over qiyas. The most notable of these opinions is the opinion of Zahiri Imam Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm narrated in his Al-Ihkam that Imam Abu Hanifa said, a mursal hadith and a weak hadith is preferred over qiyas, and further states that all Hanafis agreed with the position that a da'if hadith is preferred over qiyas. Upon further thought, one would automatically question the authenticity of this statement, seeing that Imam Ibn Hazm was from a school that was hateful of the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. However, upon remembering the Islamic legal maxim set up by the Hanafis, there is no interpretation in the presence of a text. One would easily realize that the position related must have indeed been an authentic statement of the Imam, irrespective of Ibn Hazm's bias and well-known hatred towards Abu Hanifa. Also, because Ibn Hazm was an avid supporter of a hadith-based methodology, Ibn Hazm actually has an intrinsic or natural motivation or interest to narrate this statement of Imam Abu Hanifa and narrate an authentic statement. Why? Because this statement helps push further the agenda of his madhab and his overarching goal of promoting the authority of hadith-based methodology. The opinion of a Sahabi in Hanafi Usul Hadith. In Hanafi Usul Hadith, the opinion or qawl of a Sahabi is a binding source of law, similar to ijma'ah upon meeting certain conditions. Imam Abu Hanifa considered the opinion of a Sahabi as a legal proof. This opinion has been narrated by several scholars in several works. The opinion of a Sahabi in Hanafi Usul Hadith continued. Some of these works that report this opinion of the Imam are Tarikh al-Baghdadi, Sharh Adab al-Qadi, and Akhbar Abu Hanifa, in addition to many other works. According to Hanafi Usul Hadith, there is a disagreement between Hanafis as to whether or not the opinion of a Sahabi constitutes as a legal proof or legal evidence, with the majority of Hanafis believing that it was, and some Hanafis who believed that it wasn't. The opinion of a Sahabi in Hanafi Usul Hadith continued. As previously stated, there is some disagreement between Hanafis as to whether or not the opinions of a Sahabi constitute as legal proof or evidence, with Imam Jassas, Imam al-Dabuzi, and Imam al-Karhi being the only exceptions, believing that they do not constitute as a legal evidence. Imam al-Jassas, being the first Hanafi Imam of the Hanafi Mutaakhirin, or later Hanafis, says in his Fusul fi al-Usul, there is no obligation to follow the opinion of a Sahabi unless it is in an issue that cannot be fixed with qiyas. The Hanafi science of resolving conflicting ahadith. The science of resolving conflicting ahadith, or ta'arud wal tarjih in hadith terms, is the science of reconciling multiple narrations in cases where they apparently or obviously conflict. The word ta'arud in this case means narration, and the word tarjih means weighing or analyzing. In this science, you are essentially weighing the strengths and weaknesses of two or more ahadith that both cannot be acted upon at the same time. According to Imam Nasafi, as narrated in his Kashf al-Asrar, the term ta'arud means Two equally important evidences conflicting without having any clear way to reconcile them. And this is where the name Ta'arud wal Tarjih comes from. The Hanafi methodology of resolving conflicting ahadith continued. Hanafi scholars outlined many principles in order to methodically perform tarjih on multiple narrations. In situations like this, scholars create numerous interpretations for each hadith in order to ascertain which one is the strongest based on which scenario is most in line with definitive or established Islamic evidences. About this, Imam Abu Hanifa, Hanafi Imam Ibn al-Humam wrote that there are three scenarios in which conflicting ahadith are resolved. The Hanafi methodology of resolving conflicting ahadith continued. According to Hanafi Imam Ibn al-Humam, conflicting ahadith can be reconciled or solved or fixed, combining both evidences, assuming that one has been abrogated, or by performing tarjih. This science of ta'arud wal tarjih is very advanced, and it would not be appropriate to go beyond these facts at this time. But there are many works that can be consulted on this science, such as Al-Tahrir wal-Tahrir and Fath al-Qadir of Imam Ibn al-Humam, Hujjatullah al-Baligha of Imam Dehlawi, Al-Ajwiba al-Fadail by Imam Lakhnawi, Dirasa fi Usul Hadith by Imam Turkmani, Qawaid al-Usuliyya by Imam al-Sulami, Rad al-Mukhtar by Imam Ibn Abidin, Al-Asbah wal-Nazair Nazair and Bahr al-Ra'iq by Imam Ibn Nujaym, Tabiyin al-Haqa'iq by Imam Zayla'i, Al-Fiqh and Al-Fiqh al-Mabsud by Imam Sarakhsi. Additional Hanafi usul. In addition to what we have covered, there are a few additional principles of Hanafi usul al-fiqh and Hanafi usul al-hadith. Some additional usul according to Hanafi usul al-hadith are ahadith that contain words that are considered the jawami al-kalim, or the concise but weighty words of the Prophet, must be narrated verbatim according to Imam al-Baydawi and Imam al-Sarakhsi. Words narrated in ahadith cannot replace or substitute words just because they are similar in meaning. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, on the authority of Imam Ali al-Qari, wording narrated in ahadith by meaning must be muhkam and not mujmal, mutashabih, or mushtarak, and must be narrated by someone who is proficient in the Arabic language. A hadith narrated by meaning must not have any extra or missing words. The words akhbarani, haddathani, and sami'tu in the tahammul methods of qira'atu shaykh, qira'a ala shaykh are permissible. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad, the majority of Hanafis agree that in the tahammul method of mukataba, explicit or written ijaza or permission is not fard, because permission is automatically implied. Qira'at ala shaykh is stronger than qira'atu shaykh, according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad. And lastly, the additional Hanafi usul that the Hanafis and Ahl Hadith both have the position in common that a person's internal characteristics are only known by Allah, and we are only able to judge a person's external characteristics. An opinion narrated by Hanafi scholar Ibn Hibban and his Sahih Ibn Hibban. Additional Hanafi usul continued. Additional Hanafi usul are the principle that when a faqih uses a hadith as an evidence, it means that the hadith should be considered as authentic. And this principle is narrated on the authority of Hanafi Imam Zafir al-Uthmani and his Qawaid fi Ulum al-Hadith. Additional Hanafi usul continued. And an additional Hanafi usul is that the principle that authentic and inauthentic hadith are in every collection of hadith, and this principle is narrated on the authority of Hanafi Imam Ibn al-Humam as narrated in his Fath al-Qadir. Examples of Jarh wal Ta'dil of Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa, in the science of Jarh wal Ta'dil, made the following gradings. Afqahu al-Rajulain on Abu al-Zinad Abdullah ibn Dhakwan al-Qurashi al-Madani إن هذا أعلم الناس بحديث عمرو ibn Dinar, or the grading of best in narrating a hadith from Amr ibn Dinar on Sufyan ibn Uyayna, thiqah or reliable on Shuraykh ibn Abdullah al-Nakhai, shadh or contested on Zayd Abu Ayyash, thiqah or reliable on Sufyan ibn Sa'id al-Thawri, akthab or liar on Jabir ibn Yazid al-Jufi, afdal on Ata ibn Abi Rabah, and wafir al-Aql, or best in intellect on Alqama ibn Marthad al-Kufi. Examples of ahadith rejected by Hanafis based on Hanafi usul hadith. There are many examples throughout history of famous Hanafi scholars rejecting hadith narrations, and in many cases, well-known hadith narrations. Because overarching beliefs are central to the methodology of the Hanafis, many Hanafi scholars have been brave in their rejection of some hadith narrations, even if these rejections total many. The first example that I would like to mention is the reported hadith from Ibn Umar and Abu Hurairah, narrated in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, respectively, that says that the Prophet said, there is bad luck in three things: houses, women, and horses. This hadith was rejected by Hanafis based on Hanafi usul hadith. The second example that I would like to mention is the reported hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab, narrated in Sunan Abu Dawood, that says that the Prophet said, a man will not be asked about hitting his wife. This hadith was rejected by Hanafis based on Hanafi usul hadith. The third example that I would like to mention is the reported hadith by Salama ibn al-Muhabbaq, narrated in Sunan Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah and An-Nasai, that says that the Prophet said, if a man forces another person's slave girl to have sexual intercourse with him, then she is free, and he has to give her slave owner another slave as a replacement. If the slave girl willingly did it, then she belongs to him, and he has to give her owner another slave as a replacement. This hadith was rejected by Hanafis based on Hanafi usul hadith. The fourth example that I would like to mention is the reported hadith by Ubadah ibn al-Samit, narrated in Sahih Muslim, that says that the Prophet said, for illegal sexual intercourse between two unmarried persons, the punishment is 100 lashes and exile or banishment for a year. This hadith was rejected by Hanafis based on Hanafi usul hadith. And another notable example, and other notable examples of hadith rejection by Hanafis include the hadith regarding the Prophet combining the prayers, the hadith regarding the Prophet reportedly saying that touching the private parts breaks wudu, and many other examples of ahadith. Common reasons for hadith rejection of the Hanafis based on Hanafi usul hadith. According to the logic and methodology of the Hanafis, there are various reasons as to why a hadith can be rejected or not accepted as being authentic. This slide in the presentation does not seek to present technical reasons for Hanafi hadith rejection or reasons according to hadith science proper, but rather seeks to show the premises or logical basis of Hanafis for rejecting some hadith narrations. The common premises or logical basis for why a hadith are rejected according to Hanafi usul hadith are fear that a narrator of a hadith may have made a mistake in the narration of his hadith, fear that a narrator could have received a narration from someone else who made a mistake, fear that a narrator could have heard or received only part of a hadith, fear that a narrator of a hadith could have put invalid additional words or ziyadat into a hadith that were not the words of the Prophet, fear that a narration could have been narrated by meaning rather than verbatim, and lastly, fear of a complete fabrication of a hadith. "13 reasons why Hanafi usul hadith is a distinct and reliable hadith science. Throughout history, Shafi'i usul hadith has dominated the Muslim world, as Shafi'i usul hadith is a deep science that was made popular by scholars who were also deep in both their scholarship and authorship. However, it must be stated that Hanafi usul hadith has several apparent advantages over Shafi'i usul hadith. These advantages are that Hanafi usul hadith can be accessed and used easily even in contemporary or modern times due to the fact that the sources of law such as the Quran and mutawatir ahadith that ahadith are compared against in Hanafi usul hadith are widespread and everyone has access to them, whereas in Shafi'i usul hadith only specialists have access to the materials used to verify a hadith. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith can verify a hadith with a sound sanad, reject a hadith with a sound sanad, and also verify and reject a hadith with a weak sanad, whereas Shafi'i usul hadith only allows you to verify a hadith with a strong sanad or reject a hadith with a weak sanad. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith takes in consideration and prioritizes the opinions of the fuqaha over the non-fuqaha, and also prioritizes them regarding narration and reception of a hadith. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith necessitates or requires that every faqih must also be a muhaddith, and that every muhaddith must also be a faqih, creating hadith scholars and narrators who have a wide level of knowledge. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith emphasizes comprehension over memorization in the narration of a hadith, and memorizing over writing in the recording of a hadith. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith does not require verification of mashhur ahadith, even if the hadith started out as being ahad within the first 3 generations of Islam. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith does not accept a hadith where the meaning is unclear or in need of further elaboration by Allah or the Prophet. The advantage that Hanafi usul hadith treats the Quran as the primary source of law, not equal with any other source, a principle which automatically eliminates a hadith that conflict with the Quran, saving effort and time. The advantage that in Hanafi usul hadith, there's an emphasis on combining both aql and naql, revelation and intellect, respectively, whereas in Shafi'i usul hadith, if a narration conflicts with logic or reason, the narration takes precedence, even if it is ahad, the advantage that in Hanafi usul hadith, there is an emphasis on becoming a hafiz of the Quran before becoming a faqih or a muhaddith. The advantage that in Hanafi usul hadith requires verification on all ahadith related to establishing aqaid. The advantage that in Hanafi usul hadith, a hadith can be verified without a sanad. That in Hanafi usul hadith, a hadith are either accepted or rejected. Q&A, questions and answers session at this time. And with that being said, this is now the conclusion or end of the presentation. If there are any questions related to myself or this presentation, please ask at this time. My apologies, but we are actually running a little bit close to time. So if we could possibly keep the questions maybe brief, but this is the time to ask any questions. Please, you can ask questions at this time. Please, you can ask questions at this time, and instead of typing, I'm going to answer them the faster way and actually respond back to them. Or if there are no questions, I'm going to give it 1 or 2 minutes. And if there are no questions, I can respect this. I appreciate all of you for giving me as much time as you have, and I am sorry that I am actually I've run out of time today, and I could not do more. Unfortunately, but I respect all of you today, and I am actually glad that you've attended with me. And at this time, you can ask any questions at this time. Yes, in terms of a mursal or a munqati ahadith, how can it be more reliable than a muttasil? Basically, the Hanafis and many Hanafis are actually split on this opinion. This isn't a mas'ala or issue where Hanafis are actually split, because many Hanafis actually do not accept mursal ahadith or narrations. But for the Hanafis that do accept mursal narrations, such as Imam Abu Hanifa with conditions, basically their reasoning, the Hanafi reasoning, is that the reason why an actual munqati or mursal narration is stronger than an actual muttasil hadith is because they basically are saying that there has to be a great level of trust between scholars, between scholarship in the narrators of the munqati hadith, where the narrator of the munqati hadith basically must have had so much confidence and trust in the rawi of the hadith that he narrated the hadith without mentioning where it came from, which gives an indication that the hadith is actually authentic. And also another reason why in Hanafi usul hadith, mursal hadith or munqati hadith are rated as more authentic is because the Hanafis have realized that many mursal hadith and munqati hadith have come from the fuqaha, the jurists. The jurists most commonly narrate these ahadith. And as you know by now, that the Hanafi and Hanafi usul hadith, a hadith from a jurist is very strong. So that's actually the reason why in Hanafi usul hadith, mursal and munqati ahadith are actually rated as more, because the jurists more oftenly narrate them, and also because the narration depends on a lot of trust in the scholarship of the rawi and in the sanad of the hadith, of the munqati hadith. Are there any more questions? Okay. Okay. So we are now going to thank you for your questions. We are now going to move on to, inshallah, the last and final slide. Acknowledgements. For acknowledgements, I would like to thank Allah first and foremost for each and everything. I would like to thank the best of creation, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my parents, the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, the Tabi'un, my teachers, specifically Mufti Muhammad Tawsir Miya of Darul Ilm, Birmingham. Europe's leading online Islamic institute, to whom I am forever indebted and I cannot praise and thank enough. And for more information on the Islamic Institute, Darul Ilm of Birmingham, and its Maktab, Alamiya, and Takmil courses, please visit https darulilm.co .uk for the actual website, and to get more information. So for references, many of you probably would like to know what are my references, what are my sources for the information presented in this presentation. So my references for this presentation, I have relied upon a number of works, and the names of these works can be found in the notes section of this PowerPoint slide. But for ease of access, I will mention them here verbally. To this end, I have relied upon the following works, and I ask Allah to forgive me for any text or any source that has not been mentioned due to technical reasons or forgetfulness. I have relied upon Kanas al-Wusul by Hanafi Imam Abu al-Yusr al-Bayzdawi, al-Fusul fi al-Usul in Ahkam al-Quran of Hanafi Imam Abu Bakr Ahmed ibn Ali Arazi al-Jassas, Manar al-Anwar, and Kashf al-Aswarar by Hanafi Imam Abdullah ibn Ahmed al-Nasafi, Kitab al-Usul and al-Mabsut of Hanafi Imam Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Sabi ibn Abi Sahel Abu Bakr al-Sarakhsi, Sharh Mukhtasar al-Manar, and Sharh Musnad Abi Hanifa by Hanafi Imam Ali al-Qari, Usul al-Lamishi by Hanafi Imam Abu al-Thana Mahmud ibn Zayd al-Lamishi, Tahrir al-Usul by Hanafi Imam al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, Taqweem al-Adilla by Hanafi Imam Abu Zayd al-Dabusi, al-Kifaya Ma'rifat Usul Ilm al-Riwaya, al-Taqyid al-Ilm, and al-Faqih al-Mutafaqih, and al-Tarikh al-Baghdadi by Shafi'i Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, Ila al-Sunnah Sunan, and Qawaid fi Ulum al-Hadith by Hanafi Imam Zafar Ahmed al-Uthmani, Manaqib Abi Hanifa by Hanafi Imam Muwafiq ibn Ahmed al-Makki, al-Mizan al-Tidal, and Tadhkir al-Huffaz and Siyad al-A'lam by Hanbali Imam Abu Abdullah ibn al-Dhahabi, al-Muqaddimah ibn Salah by Shafi'i Imam Abu Amr ibn al-Salah, Fawati al-Rahhamut by Hanafi Imam Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi, Tarikh al-Kabir by Mujtahid Imam Abu Abdullah Muhammad al-Bukhari, Alim wal Muta'alim by Hanafi Imam Abu Hanifa, al-Madhkal ila Alim al-Sahih by Shafi'i Imam Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Hakim al-Nisaburi, Yahya ibn Ma'in wa Kitabuhu al-Tarikh by Hanafi Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in, and many other works, countless works, about 5 more works, about 10 more works that I actually didn't narrate, but I have actually created a reference page that can be downloaded with this presentation that contains all of the Hanafi sources, references, where basically it contains every opinion about Hanafi Usul Hadith, or the Hanafi Madhab, or principle, or law, or fiqh of the Hanafi Madhab, as the scholars give the opinion on it, along with their references. And this document can actually be easily accessed and downloaded along with this presentation. So brother, you asked a question. قبل الواحد cannot be used, according to Hanafi usul hadith, cannot be used for nafl, mustahab, and mubah acts, according to Hanafi usul hadith. Da'if, the belief or principle that da'if ahadith can be used for fada'il, is basically a Shafi'i, Hanafi, Shafi'i usul hadith, principle of usul hadith, and it's not of the Hanafi usul hadith. So the principle that that da'if hadith can be used for fada'il or nafil acts or acts of virtue is actually not a belief in Hanafi usul hadith. It's actually a belief and a principle in the glorious science of Shafi'i usul hadith. So this is the end of the presentation. I respect you all and ask you to make dua for me, and I will do the same. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Also, I'm actually still logged into the presentation. What do I do at this time? I'll just log out. Okay, I'm getting ready to close my browser right now. I thank you again for working with me, and I can't wait to do more shows. Assalamu alaikum.